Pastor Creflo Dollar was seen by everyone as having everything under control, including wealth, influence, a worldwide following, and the assurance of a man who felt he had been selected for something greater. But something was subtly crumbling, piece by piece, underneath that glossy confidence. The man who once advocated for unstoppable prosperity has had to face unexpected repercussions in recent months. As painful realities come to light, Creflo Dollar must confront the one thing for which he never prepared his supporters: the prospect that all he created was the result of a disastrous error. The ascent started in a cafeteria. The narrative of Creflo Augustus Dollar Jr. did not start in a television studio, a mansion, or a megachurch. It started on January 28, 1962, in a small house in College Park, Georgia, that was molded by religion and discipline. His mother worked as a food server in the Kathleen Mitchell Elementary School cafeteria, while his father was a police officer. Even while it seemed insignificant at the time, that information would come back to haunt him decades later in unexpected ways. He never dreamed of becoming a pastor as a child. Being a professional football player was his dream. And when he enrolled at West Georgia College in the early 1980s, he brought that goal with him. However, that route was broken by a severe injury, which was the first of many pivotal moments that would shape his life. He began going to Bible study groups while he was recovering, not because he was passionate about it, but rather because he wanted something to occupy his time. He did, however, talk of feeling born again one day, a moment that forever altered the course of his life. Before long, he was presiding over his own little Bible study groups, which expanded more quickly than he could have predicted. Taffy Bolton, a young woman who would go on to become his wife and longtime ministry partner, was one of the attendees. After getting his degree in educational therapy in 1984, Dollar began working with individuals who had learning difficulties at Bronner Psychiatric Institute. He was skilled at the profession, but he was unable to resist the increasing call to ministry. He made a decision that would influence everything 2 years later, in 1986. In the Kathleen Mitchell Elementary cafeteria, where his mother used to prepare meals, and where he had previously been a member of the school's first Black integration group, he established World Changers Ministries Christian Center. That first service had only 8 attendees, but the lesson he taught, simple, self-assured, and pragmatic, struck a chord. Crowds rose rapidly, and his ambition grew along with his congregation. His prosperity message would make him a worldwide celebrity, and what started in a cafeteria would soon grow into one of America's biggest megachurches. However, its surge concealed fissures that would eventually enlarge into something much more destructive: the gospel of wealth that created an empire. The message that characterized Creflo Dollar's ascent also served as the basis for his most significant controversies as Globe Changers Ministries changed. Over the course of the late 1980s and early 1990s, Dollar developed the prosperity gospel, which would serve as the focal point of his worldwide influence. He preached that financial prosperity and personal success could be attained through faith, positive confession, and generous giving, particularly tithing. It seemed like a ray of hope to suffering families. It seemed like divine strategy to Christians looking for a second opportunity. And the crowds kept growing with each sermon, each broadcast, and each promise of a breakthrough. His ministry was so big by 1991 that he changed its name to World Changers Church International to better reflect the scope he felt God had given him. His television and radio shows quickly followed, leading to the debut of Changing Your World. Millions of homes heard his lectures thanks to these broadcasts. He was no longer a local pastor by the middle of the 1990s. His congregation extended well beyond College Park, and he was a televangelist with a global following. His teachings were followed by people in the UK, Canada, India, and Africa, thinking that it was finally possible to achieve financial miracles. His rise was epitomized by the World Dome, an enormous 8,500-seat sanctuary that was finished in 1995 at a cost of almost $20 million. Dollar maintained that the fact that it was constructed without bank funding was evidence of what faith and generosity might achieve. WCCI claimed to have over 30,000 members and generate close to $70 million in revenue annually by the middle of the 2000s. Additionally, Dollar revealed a vision of 500 fellowship churches worldwide as the ministry grew into New York, Los Angeles, Toronto, Johannesburg, Houston, and the Gold Coast. But behind the momentum, anxiety was rising. Critics began to doubt his own wealth as he preached prosperity more and more. He was viewed by his supporters as a living example of how faith led to plenty. Skeptics noticed something different. A pastor who seemed more like a corporate CEO than a spiritual leader. Private planes, Rolls-Royces, and opulent houses. The gap between awe and distrust became wider with each new purchase. Nevertheless, the machine continued to expand. Dollar thought he was creating a spiritual empire. Others, however, questioned whether he was constructing something much more brittle, something that may fall apart the instant one of his theological tenets was challenged. Wealth, luxury, and the first fissures in the foundation were all on the horizon. Creflo Dollar's personal lifestyle came into greater focus as his ministry grew, a degree of riches that is uncommon among pastors, even those who support the prosperity gospel movement. Dollar had a $3.4 million estate in Fayetteville, but many of his supporters only made a modest living. The average household in College Park made only $29,000 annually. Situated on 182.5 acres, the house had a pool, a large fountain, lengthy stone walls, and a private gated drive that protected the property from the public. It came to represent both his achievements and his increasing estrangement from the people he preached to. Additionally, he possessed a high-rise penthouse at the Time Warner Center in New York City, which he had bought for $2.5 million and later sold for $3.75 million, making a $1 million profit. Another house, valued at more than $2 million, was located in New Jersey. There were apparently many Rolls-Royces in his garage, at least one of which was worth about $460,000. These items were considered extravagant by his detractors, but Dollar saw them as symbols of God's favor. The scope of his ambition was also reflected in his mode of transportation. Dollar had flown a Gulfstream G3, an old aircraft that had already had 2 mechanical failures, one over the Pacific Ocean and another after takeoff in London, long before the jet scandal broke. He maintained that a private plane was a government requirement rather than a luxury, and that commercial airlines did not operate his timetable. Nevertheless, for many onlookers, the homes, cars, and jets all undermined the legitimacy of his message. Concerns were voiced by church watchdog organizations, citing his failure to release basic audited information. Ministry Watch has rated his organization's financial openness with an F. The U.S. Senate Finance Committee looked into him and 5 other televangelists between 2007 and 2011, raising concerns about possible personal use of ministry funds. Dollar claimed that the government lacked the right to review his financial records and refused to provide them. He made it through that chapter legally. Although no charges were brought, the harm to one's reputation was done. His Public Images Foundation started to reveal fractures for the first time. His detractors noticed a pattern: spiritual authority without transparency, wealth without responsibility. And then what happened? Those gaps would be pushed wide open by an incident that would go down as one of his career's most notorious moments. The nation was rocked by the $65 million jet scandal. Criticism against Creflo Dollar has become commonplace by 2015. However, nothing could have prepared him for the public uproar that erupted when he started Project G650, a campaign to raise money to buy a $65 million Gulfstream G650 private jet. Even devoted followers were taken aback by the proposal. Dollar maintained that the jet was about carrying out God's will rather than luxury. His former aircraft, a Gulfstream G3 from 1984, had experienced serious technical problems, such as a nose gear collapse in London and an engine failure over the Pacific. Dollar maintained that since airlines didn't follow God's schedule, commercial flight wasn't an option. The campaign's call for 200,000 donors to give at least $300 apiece swiftly gained traction on social media, in mainstream media, and among religious communities. Experts in aviation started pointing up discrepancies almost immediately. According to Dollar's ministry, the new aircraft will enable them to deliver 100,000 pounds of food and supplies for aid efforts. However, the G650's baggage capacity was significantly less than what the government openly advertised, weighing only about 2,500 pounds. The reaction was strong and quick. Some questioned why a pastor required the world's most costly private jet. Why was he unable to select a more economical, smaller aircraft? Why should his supporters, many of whom made far less money than he did, have to foot the bill. Leaders even voiced their opinions within the Christian community. Kirk Franklin, a gospel musician, publicly denounced the notion that having plenty of material possessions indicated faith, saying it an indication of a lack of morality. Within days, the fundraising website was covertly taken down due to widespread indignation, but Dollar refused to back down. He addressed his applauding congregation in a sermon soon after the controversy. "You cannot stop me if I want to believe God for a $65 million plane. Until Jesus returns, I will continue to dream." The rage outside the church was a stark contrast to the cheers within. The controversy rekindled the Senate's earlier worries about televangelists' financial responsibilities and openness. Even if Dollar eventually obtained private jets in other ways, the harm to his reputation was irreversible. For many, the jet represented everything that detractors feared, a preacher whose wealth appeared to be directly correlated with his level of faith. And as the scrutiny grew increasingly intense, a much more painful and intimate chapter was about to begin. Arrest, family strife, and the start of a public breakdown. Creflo Dollar, a man whose power spanned countries, had seemed impenetrable for years, whose followers thought he had unquestionable spiritual authority and whose sermons were heard in billions of households. However, everything inside his own house in Fayette County, Georgia, changed in June 2012. Suddenly, the pastor who advocated for discipline, faith, and divine order was handcuffed. The police report states that when a furious disagreement got out of hand, Dollar's 15-year-old daughter called the police. When she disobeyed his decision to prevent her from going to a party, she said he choked her, wrestled her to the ground, punched her, and even struck her with a shoe. She claimed that the scratch on her neck, which the officers recorded, was caused by the altercation. However, Dollar told police that it was only eczema and that he had only put her under restraint after she had struck him first. He denied hitting or choking her, but he did acknowledge wrestling her to the ground. News of his detention went around the country in a matter of hours. The picture of a pastor getting arrested stood in stark contrast to the weekly lectures he gave on family order and spiritual authority. His reputation was under more scrutiny than ever before due to the charge of simple violence and cruelty to minors. A few days later, Dollar addressed his congregation and referred to the charges as being overblown. The congregation exploded in cheers. He is viewed by many as a victim of miscommunication and media misrepresentation. Parents have the right to discipline their children, according to supporters. Religious communities, according to critics, have too frequently backed leaders at the expense of victims, and a boundary had been passed. The matter ended quietly on the legal front. Following Dollar's completion of a court-mandated anger management program, the charges were withdrawn. However, the harm persisted. For the first time, even a few devoted fans quietly questioned what was going on behind the scenes of the meticulously constructed world he showcased. Meanwhile, naysayers brought up old issues again. The costly residences, the unresolved financial issues, and the widening gap between the community and the pastor. The arrest revealed the human frailty hidden beneath the empire he had established, not just a family tragedy. Later on, an announcement would rock that enterprise more profoundly than any previous scandal. He acknowledged in public that one of the fundamental ideas upon which his ministry was founded had always been incorrect. The startling admission that made all the difference. The idea that tithing was a heavenly mandate served as the foundation for Creflo Dollar's empire for over 30 years. He repeated it in conferences all over the world, wrote best-selling books, and preached it on television. Giving 10% of their money was not only a gesture of kindness to his followers, it was also a spiritual duty and a means of gaining access to God's financial favor. Many stretched their budgets because they thought they were sowing seeds that would bear fruit. Dollar's net worth was previously believed to be $27 million, making him one of the richest preachers in America. But when he took the World Changers Church International platform in June 2022, he stated something that nearly no one had anticipated hearing. Dollar informed his audience that his decades-long tithing beliefs were incorrect in a lecture titled The Great Misunderstanding. He asked them to discard all of the books, DVDs, and sermons he had written about the topic. He clarified that Christians under grace were never intended to give out of necessity, fear, or guilt, and that tithing was a part of Old Testament law. Supporters were taken aback by the spectacular reversal, while detractors were incensed. It was an act of honesty for some. For others, it was an acknowledgement made decades too late. Dollar acknowledged his prior transgressions but declined to offer an apology. He asserted that he would not have attained his current level of spiritual awareness if he had not preached those teachings. Many, however, questioned the timing. The exact doctrine he suddenly abandoned was the foundation upon which his ministry had been constructed, both financially and physically. Many questioned whether he would return funds obtained under beliefs that he now believed to be false. However, Dollar provided no financial transparency, no reparations, and no reimbursements. His opulent residences, vehicles, and private aircraft were unaltered. Watchdog organizations were cautioning about the absence of accountability in his ministry. The shift, according to theological detractors, validated their long-standing claim that the prosperity gospel was unstable. After learning that the foundation of their contributions had been a miscommunication, even several devoted followers felt deceived and uncertain about what to believe. Although Creflo Dollar's ministry was not destroyed by the revelation, millions of people's perceptions of him were altered. The man who advocated for prosperity, certainty, and divine order was confronted with a new story for the first time, one in which he was no longer shielded from the repercussions of his own teachings by the riches he promised others. How do you feel about the latest issues facing Pastor Creflo Dollar? Do you think he ought to be held accountable for the lessons he now disavows? Please let us know what you think below, and don't forget to subscribe and like the video to see more tales like this one.